Is there no balm in Gilead? Biblical intertext in Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale. This is the article that I chose to read about, and this is by Dorota Filipczak, and she was the associate professor in the Institute of English Studies at the University of Lodz, Poland. So you can see her right down there in the bottom right corner, but she was a professor and a intellectual in English studies, um, and so she kind of does this deep dive into Handmaid's Tale. All right, so just a quick overview of, well, the article and also this presentation and what it's going to be about. So Philip Sack kind of realizes these similarities, and she reads The Handmaid's Tale and she realizes between names or whatever it is, there is a connection and allusions to the Bible. And then she also recognizes the way the Bible is used by the regime. So she realizes that the Bible itself is in the book explicitly, in the novel, The Handmaid's Tale explicitly, and the regime uses the Bible to kind of control the people and keep control of especially the women in the regime. And then she takes this main idea of Gilead and how Gilead is the actual name of the city and regime in The Handmaid's Tale, but it's also a town and location in the Old Testament, and it's just east of the Jordan, as you can see right down there in the bottom. It's kind of in the red, and so she does a deep dive into Gilead and what comes along with that. All right, so the first quote here, this is from the first page in the second paragraph, and she talks about how this Bible is kind of this big, big kind of idea in The Handmaid's Tale, and how it's kind of only for the elites and only for the men, and everyone else is just kind of supposed to listen to them and listen to the way that they think about the Bible and their understanding of it. And so, I think this is definitely an issue, because with any book, but especially a religious book, you have to be able to read it and find that connection for yourself. And you can see these problems that arise in The Handmaid's Tale whenever only people are being taught at and preached at, but they're not really able to see the Bible for themselves and learn it for themselves. So I definitely agree with the author that this, the people who are forbidden to read it, it really becomes a problem that they cannot see it for themselves, and they're only able to know the Bible through what other people see it as. The author then kind of finds this really interesting and intriguing connection between Jacob, Rachel, and Bilhah, and between Alfred, the commander, and Serena Joy. And Jacob, Rachel, and Bilhah. So Rachel was not able to be pregnant, and so she had this infertility crisis. And the author kind of points that out, and it's like, in Gilead, in The Handmaid's Tale, this regime, this is where this all comes from. It has this infertility crisis, and so then they have to use these women to get pregnant and to continue the commander's offspring and the elite offspring. And so that was the same thing. Rachel was not able to become pregnant, and so she allowed Jacob to be intimate with Bilhah and try to produce an offspring, and it ended up working, and Bilhah did actually have some of Jacob's sons. So my third quote now, the author kind of shows how Gilead is used in The Handmaid's Tale. In the first kind of particular case that she talks about is how it speaks of Gilead knows no bounds. Gilead is within you. This is kind of scary to think about whenever a government is so ingrained in society that it is you, it's within you, and all these women, Gilead is part of them, and they cannot escape it. And so I kind of agree with her, the author here, that she realizes that Gilead is so ingrained in the people that they cannot escape it. And then the fourth quote that I picked out is talking about a reference to in the Old Testament of the Bible. And Jeremiah asks a question there, and it says, is there no balm in Gilead? And so Gilead was known for this balm that kind of healed any sort of issues with humans and, any cuts or anything. And so he's asking, is there no balm in Gilead? Is there something that kind of can fix this problem? And then in the Handmaid's Tale, this question is kind of flipped, where it says there is balm in Gilead, and that's in the hymn that they sing. And so this idea that Gilead and the regime is kind of assuring people, hey, it's okay, when in reality they're really hurting each other and it's really not okay. The fifth quote here is talking about the gifts of Offred and how they kind of are remnants of the past. And she talks about here about Jacob and Rachel. And so God gave Jacob kind of this commandment to flee his father-in-law's house. And so that's Rachel's father. And Rachel, before she leaves, she takes this idol that kind of gives them all the inheritance from her father. And so they flee. And so there's kind of this thing from the past that Jacob's past life is still showing in this idol, and that you can still kind of see his past life even though he's trying to start this new life away from his father-in-law's house. And I definitely agree that you can see this as kind of the commander and Offred are trying to start this, or they have started this new life in this new regime, but you can see how the commander's gifts still show remnants of the past. Then the author points out the similarity between Atwood's Gilead and Israel, and she talks about this political and military kind of time in the messianic state for the Israelites, and it talks about this complete annihilation of the previous country, and you can definitely see this in The Handmaid's Tale. And I think this is kind of one of the clearest connections that the author found, and that you can really see, it talks about how they machine gunned all Congress and took away that whole government. And so there's this new regime, and that's kind of what you see in Israel, where there's kind of annihilation of this previous country, and this new kind of thing, this new state arises. This seventh quote that I picked out is, she talks about this messianic element that's kind of missing from The Handmaid's Tale. So you see all these connections, but then in the Old Testament, prophets kind of found and would always speak of abundance in nature as a sign of Yahweh's or God's love and care. But she seems to find that there isn't that in The Handmaid's Tale, but I actually disagree with that. I think there is that in The Handmaid's Tale, because in the historical notes, one of the professors speaking is actually a female, and so you can see that that regime is over with, and now females are actually allowed to have a voice in public and publicly speak. So I kind of disagree with the author that that element is completely missing from The Handmaid's Tale. And then my last quote here I found really interesting, that the author finds this connection between Eve and Offred, and Offred kind of takes on this role as Eve, as committing the first sin, which obviously I don't think Offred committed the first sin, but this idea that the commander kind of forced her to sin as he takes her to this nightclub and makes her get involved in these sexual kind of things that are wrong for the regime. But I think Eve is definitely, you can see her in Offred as the commander is kind of this Satan who's trying to tempt her and make her do the wrong, and she ends up falling into that sin and into the wrongdoing. All right, so this article was very interesting, and I think Dorota Philipsak did really well to kind of break down these allusions, find these connections between all the Bible, but especially the city of Gilead in the Old Testament, and then the regime of Gilead in the novel. And, I also thought these connections between her and Eve and, Jacob, Rachel, and Bilhah were all very interesting. So I was very impressed, and I really enjoyed this article.